Coming up on this episode of the Roundtable.
Guess who's been betrayed? The normal Americans who, for most of this country's history, have had a pretty solid consensus on some pretty basic things. Yes, there have been times of conflict. Yes, there have been times of realignment. But the threads that shine through are obvious to anyone who does even the slightest bit of investigation into American intellectual history. And it really wasn't until, approximately the moment that Barack Obama splashed the rainbow flag on the White House that suddenly things started to change. And what was normal in 1985 and normal in 1995 and normal in 2005 suddenly became, according to self-appointed experts, insane, beyond the pale, racist, extremist. It's garbage. It's a betrayal of normal Americans, and it needs to be called out as such. We have more in common than is being represented to us by the fanatics who are trying to demonize our country.
Hello and welcome to the Roundtable, a juvenile podcast brought to you by the Combative American Mind, a grotesque production of the Claremont Institute. I am your makeshift host, Spencer Clavin, associate editor of the Claremont Review of Books and features editor of the American Mind. As you can tell, this is going to be our episode about the Bulwark hit piece. All of those adjectives that I just used are adjectives used to describe us. They are three among the 12,000 words published by the Bulwark in an article called "What the Hell Happened to the Claremont Institute?" We're going to talk about this, a really quite hilarious hit piece today, and I'm joined, as always, by managing editor Seth Barron, executive editor James Poulos, and founding editor Matthew Peterson. Ryan Williams, our publisher and president, is out because he's still at the Publius Fellowship, as indeed is Matt, but Ryan has teaching duties, as I understand it, tonight. So you're stuck with me. But okay, the Bulwark. For those of you who don't know, this is really the epitome of fake conservative, conscientious objector, read domesticated opposition, quote unquote conservatism. They published really not just this one enormous think piece, but as Nick Short, our social media champion, pointed out, they've published about 4 of these in the past couple of weeks, and this one was also sort of recycled and regurgitated by the week. So it was obviously some kind of coordinated attempt to delegitimize or undermine the various efforts of the Claremont Institute, as the author puts it, from the top all the way down, from the Claremont Review of Books, which she considers, and I should say by she, I mean Laura K. Field, who's written on us before. Laura K. Field considers the CRB kind of the most apparently sophisticated spearhead of this secretly white supremacist splinter cell, all the way down to the juvenile and combative podcasts of such disgusting enterprises as the American Mind, which have defended the big lie that the election was stolen or simply irregular. All of this shocks Dr. Field. And so she mentions everyone on this podcast by name except me, which I'm very offended about because I do so much to be as obnoxious and distasteful as possible that I just really feel I'm not getting my recognition. I'm not going to read any of this piece because part of the joy of seeing it rolled out was how many people just said this is too long, and now I'm donating to the Claremont Institute because they're obviously doing good work. But I do think there are a number of things to discuss, among them the coordination of this attack. One can imagine the Slack chains and email threads on which it was discussed. I'd like to open the floor and just ask, why now? And what do you guys make of this?
Yeah, I mean, a few things just to set the field. There's a lot to talk about potentially. First off, the coordination. It's clear. I guess, I look at this in a psychological way. It's really interesting to me how the people with the most kind of animosity and hate are the kind of quote unquote never Trumpers, right? Or the people who are still striving towards respectability, living in kind of the past, they still live in a world where you trust the experts instead of distrusting them as your go-to, and they're still climbing ladders. Something James had a great tweet about. And so why are they so angry at us? I mean, besides the fact the whole thing's an op and funded by a lefty billionaire. So, or one thing I don't understand is why more people don't just say this is a fake right. I mean, it's actually funded by a leftist. Leftists are funding this. Leftists are keeping it going. Leftists are in the audience. So this is a fake right operation that somehow the right allows to exist. We should all train cannon fire and just say, "Be gone, you're fake." But given that, why? So it's lefty funded. Why are these people exist who kind of pretend that they're in the middle? I'm not really on the left. I'm not really for the wokeness, but they have this animosity towards us. And what it suggests to me is that they kind of know, in some part of their soul, that they've sold out, that they haven't stood up, they haven't. They're still, craving respectability and groveling before the man. And anyone who clearly doesn't care about their ladders and their standards and that are set by these corrupt institutions scares the hell out of them. They can't abide the fact that we're not kept opposition. That's scary. And it's the equivalent of a child going, telling on their friend and going to the friend's parents, like, look what they're doing, going to the principal, right? And then the principal in this case is the deep state, Biden's administration, and all that the left is preparing to do to come after people like us and paint us all as extremists. And they want to tell on us. And I got news for them. You're not going to be the prison guard in the gulag. They're not gonna make it. They're groveling. I mean, and so I think the psychological tell here is, why are they so angry at us? Why does it bother them so much that they supposedly institution they've supposedly regarded as very respectable for all these years now all of a sudden has done very bad, naughty things, and we are going to tell on you to the man? And they're just trying to paint a target, right? But what's interesting is the motivation here is there's something visceral about it, and I think it reveals that they know somewhere that they are still servants of a regime that doesn't like them much either.
Yeah, I mean, I find it really boring and distasteful personally to spend my precious time on planet Earth sort of like thinking about people who don't make a contribution to my life and talking about them. And so I'm gonna keep my reflections pretty brief here, but Juvenile, like a publication that runs reviews of Marvel movies, Combative, like a publication that repeatedly attacks its own side instead of the opposite team, Grotesque, like what is more grotesque than an intellectual puppet state sort of pretending that it has influence and an audience far in excess of what it actually has. These are people who simply have no response to the major defining issues of our time. They have, a policy of just avoiding any conflict or confrontation with the militant woke left, which is constantly telling them to do the work. That's the big catchphrase. And yet, this is a crew who has simply refused to do the work of understanding what is actually going on with technology today. No new ideas, no pulse. No sense of how and why it is that the military-industrial complex of the national security state has contributed to the overreach and the collapse of the America that until a couple decades ago we used to know and love. They have done none of the work in trying to understand the trajectory of the left and how the most radical wing of the left is trying to take control of the most powerful technology in the country to fundamentally transform America. I mean, these are basic elements of any political analysis, whether it's going to come from the right or the center or, the far left of like a Glenn Greenwald. This is fair game, basic stuff that anyone who wants to make any kind of worthwhile contribution to the discourse, such as it is going to have some views on. And if you can't muster any kind of coherent, not to mention compelling, not to mention, like an actual source of leadership interpretation of these historic events, of these transformative events during one of the most, uncertain, up for grabs times in American history, then you're wasting people's time. And to hear professional time wasters, poke their nose into our tent and leave something stinky on our carpet is just, more than anyone should be asked to bear.
Yeah, and I mean, I just kind of skimmed the article. I talked to a number of people who, read it and were just like kind of cracking up at how long it was and how little it contained. But just the idea that they fix, and this is not the first time they've done it either, on one line in an article that kind of pokes fun at Amanda Gorman and just treating her like the idea that you would smirk at this like really jejune kind of poem that's just totally anodyne and like, silly. But just to express such consternation and offense that anyone would make fun of Amanda Gorman. I mean, come on, is there any like 16-year-old in the country who could listen to that without guffawing? I mean, it's just absurd. And we're expected to believe that these people at the Bulwark like are nodding like, yes, Amanda Gorman is like the new Yeats. And to call it, to insist that it's racist to make fun of Amanda Gorman or her dumb poem. It's just, the whole thing is like beneath contempt. And like, if they were saying anything nice about us, it would make me stop and reconsider what we're doing. But, it's so absurd.
Yeah, I was sort of heartened as Nick was explaining to me the reaction to this piece. It sort of suggested to me that we have all the right friends and all the right enemies. And there will come, I believe, a time for us to reckon with the fact that our enemies include some very powerful people who are making serious moves to impose a form of tech authoritarianism upon us, which, as James indicates, could potentially be more powerful than anything we have yet conceived of or seen. I mean, here they are, right, floating these ideas just left and right now, almost flailing around, having no idea, having no credibility with the American people, having no really arguments to persuade folks of their absurd worldview. The Biden administration is now just kind of taking the mask off and resorting to like going door to door and entering into your SMS messages and criminalizing conservative thought, or as they call it, hatreds, which lead in their ludicrous claim to domestic terrorism of the kind that also in their ludicrous claim almost toppled the government on January, right? I mean, they're doing all of this now because that's kind of who they are, and they have a really absurd constructed facade of legitimacy, of intellectual legitimacy, of which the Bulwark is part, right? I mean, the Bulwark functions in this monoparty regime just as much as the Washington Post does or the New York Times. That is, as the propaganda arm of a thoroughly disingenuous front for a serious attempt to unmake the country, right? That's the Bulwark's role in that, is to like mudsling at conservative institutions that actually want to get something done and that actually want to defend the Constitution of the United States, and to get patted on the head and get eaten last, and maybe they'll, if they're really good boys, like they'll and girls, then they'll get some kind of court jester position in the grand coming woke takeover of America. And the fact that we want no part of that obviously makes us appalling to them, because we're a rebuke to their cowardice. And yeah, I think there may come a time when we, like at the American mind, will need to reckon seriously with the very real animosity toward us among this whole conglomerate of currently very powerful people. But I was heartened by the fact that in this instance, the Bulwark is so thoroughly exposed for what it is. And our friends, people like Josh Hammer, former fellows, right, Christopher Rufo, and a lot of, just really all over serious conservative media. There were defenses of us mounted. There were invitations to donate to the Claremont Institute. And I think that kind of antic disregard for the hyper seriousness of this very outraged regime, that we would ever dare to suggest that Black Lives Matter is anything other than a virtuous attempt to rectify serious racial injustices in this country, right? Like the fact that people laughed at it really made me happy. And I think, that's the more that we can do that, and the more support we can gather from absurd attacks like this, the better.
Yeah, I agree with that. I really thought that it was heartening, because you've seen this over and over again on the right, really, since last summer, where times where you would have thought, an issue people would cave on, everyone comes together. And, that's what happens. You circle the wagons in times like these, if you have any sense of what's going on. And, these clowns, we're in a week in which Joe Biden is talking about election integrity efforts by the right are worse than the Civil War, using insane inflammatory rhetoric that the likes of which, it blows my mind. And then the actions that his administration is actually taking are unbelievable. It's in real time. We're watching something happen that's very serious. Most of the country knows something really bad is happening, and they all think something really bad is going to happen. From my Uber driver yesterday to some really intelligent analysts I was talking to last night. These guys are talking about why Harrison Ford's best roles are neither Han nor Indy. Maybe some truth to that, but that's what is Black Widow any good? And the rest of it is all, the idiocracy in Tennessee. It's just against the right. This is a propaganda op. And I think what's so hilarious about this piece is the serious tone, as you say, in which it's written, as if we live in a different world. And it's not an argument. It's not even journalism. She didn't interview anyone. This is a middling academic who got assigned to do Oppo and gets paid to do it. And I have to say, there is a little history here we can go into a little bit, not for the sake of boring our audience, but providing some background. It must have been 1984, 1985. Members of the Claremont Institute, including Charles Kessler, who she goes after here in a ridiculous way, just has a whole section devoted to Charles, our colleague here, editor of the Claremont Review of Books, and a professor at Claremont McKenna College. And she also, goes after the rest of us, but she goes after Charles. And in 1984, Charles Kessler wrote a review of this woman, Laura K. Field's mentor and dissertation advisor, Thomas Pangle, who teaches at the University of Texas at Austin. So in other words, there's a long-running feud within intellectual circles between, her mentor and the person she's attacking. And there was a serious debate during those days between Harry Jaffa and Thomas Pangle, her mentor, and Charles Kessler on Jaffa's side about America and patriotism. And basically, to boil it down, Pangle says, look, America is a modern project. It's just about individual rights. The founders were not really religious at all. And it's just the protection of individual rights. But there was no notion of virtue or honor or glory or the common good in any real sense. That's all it is, but that's okay. That means we have to think about our rights in the abstract. America is just a proposition, just an idea. So we have to educate ourselves about what rights are. And, Kessler and Jaffa say, no, that's ridiculous. That's not actually true to what America is. And furthermore, you're not going to be able to keep a regime together if you think that's all there is to it. And, here's Field attacking, and she links to her mentor's old piece. She says, well, these Claremont people, their notion of America is what got them into this place, and now they're going to become nihilists. The ones who were defending religion and the good and virtue, they're the ones who are going to become nihilists. And I just have to say, I mean, that intellectual tradition that she's coming from, where are these guys? America is falling apart, and it's not because of the bad orange man. There are serious things happening in this world right now that James was just talking about that everyone is concerned with. Where are those professors and scholars? I mean, Socrates stayed with the regime. He was innocent, right, in the eyes of Plato and his followers. He could have escaped and left, but instead he took his punishment according to what we know, and he stays there and he takes the hemlock and he dies. Now they don't really run either. They're not running yet, and they're not going to take the hemlock and fight. They're not going to stand up. They're not going to sacrifice for their country. They're not going to say anything about the wokeness or anything else. The Leo Strauss Award goes to woke crazy stuff. So this whole line of scholarship is really, I mean, it's petering out. It's going to die, and they will not be remembered. And I think that's why there's some anger here, where Claremont has some life, where they really think that America is or was about something good. And the irony is, these are the people turning around and talking about, oh, my sacred democracy, and you guys are destroying it. And that is all it's all kind of a convoluted bunch of BS in a way, though, because what this really boils down to is a bunch of paid operatives, wagging their fingers and pretending the world we live in doesn't exist. It won't matter as far as an article goes, really, for anything. I mean, it's not going to affect donors. It's not going to affect our unity. In fact, it unifies the Institute. It unifies the right when these kinds of attacks happen. Last thing, you notice that what's happening is every time these attacks come in, I think the coalition that we're part of grows stronger. And the wagon circling is really the feeling people have, because things are getting very serious in terms of government action and sort of cultural degeneracy, our military falling apart. I mean, all the things going on. So there's a silver lining in that, as I think, as you say, Spencer, that there's a way in which we stay high-minded, but we have fun. I mean, the Bulwark is very concerned that anyone on the internet would be having fun at any given point in time, but we have fun doing it with that kind of, the kind of we don't care spirit, and let that show. And that's the strength right now, is sort of organizing and combining to strike back in ways that are serious. And that will mean much more than talking about the Bulwark at all.
Yeah, I mean, for those who really want, and I don't recommend it, to do a deep dive into these pieces, the sort of betrayal of Straussianism, as you describe it, Matt, is kind of the theme of the essay in The Week. And there is a telling line in it, I think, which is that Strauss, Damon Linker writes, Strauss had sought a degree of spiritual fulfillment in politics that could only be achieved through either religious piety or philosophical contemplation of truths that lie beyond political attachment. That is a lesson that Strauss's devotees at the Claremont Institute, who delight in pouring rhetorical gasoline on the country's many smoldering civic conflicts, have actively unlearned. I mean, there is a purity culture to this, right? The purity culture thread that runs through it, which has always been a major part of Never Trumpism, right? That the minute Trump emerged and he was Orange Man bad, and it was finally a time for choosing between looking like a kind of a boor by supporting Trump, but therefore getting serious about solving some of the country's problems, or continuing to get invited to all the nice cocktail parties and looking like a virtuous, nice person while the whole country fell down the toilet and went up in flames, right? Some people chose to be pure and to abstract themselves. And, it's all about, I cannot possibly deign to vote for Donald Trump, right? Yeah. And this kind of removal from that, from getting your hands dirty, which this sort of anti-prudentialist streak is a big part of it. Sorry, Matt, it sounds like you wanted to say something.
No, I think that's very right. And it's funny because, look, I get if, you're an old professor and don't understand what's happening politically and don't like Trump or whatever. But it's another thing to start bringing philosophy into it. And there, I mean, it just gets laughable. Like, okay, you're right. We should have stay away from politics, which is an odd thing, I think, for someone who calls them Straussian to say. But stay away from it and just retire into what? Into where? I mean, it doesn't exist. they're all going to be, chased out. I mean, they're going to die off. The tenured professors, the new ones are not like the old. The whole thing is going to die. It's over. It's done. The academy is done. This is not a time you can't sit back. And in the meantime, you say, what are you doing about it? We're doing something different because we see what time it is and we're acting. And in the meantime, to sit around and shake the finger, it's just sort of laughable. And I think the reason we're talking about it at all is just to inform the audience who wants to know. And I think everyone wants to feel some solidarity in crushing these people. But this is wagging the finger while you do nothing. And in the case of the Bulwark, worse than nothing, you actively attack the side that's trying to protect what you claim everyone should be about, which is this lofty pursuit. But yeah, have fun in the academy as it implodes. Go nuts. And in the meantime, what are his students doing, right? What is she doing? I mean, granted, this is not talking about all the students. Some of them are friends, but what is she doing? She's not in the academy, right? She's getting paid to be a hack and attack people.
Well, let's bring in a couple news items here, because there is this interesting thing taking shape. I'm noticing as I'm listening to you guys and talking with you is that, the absurdity of the regime for all who have eyes to see, and the just pure transparency at this point of the pretensions of the ruling classes, right? That is accelerating, right? The accelerationists are getting what they want, and that things are just getting more and more transparent and absurd and evil, right? I mean, the gay men's chorus recently released a video entitled, I think, "We're Coming for Your Children," in which they sang about how they were coming for your children to indoctrinate them into LGBTQ ideology. And there was this sort of thin gruel response that, well, but they were actually saying they were just going to make your children tolerant. But either way, it amounts to like, we are coming. You don't have the right to teach your children their traditional beliefs. We have the right to come for your children. And then on the other side of that, right, like there does seem to be at least a section of the right, a number of conservatives who, as we are always saying, using Matt's great phrase, right, who know what time it is and who are starting to get a little bit serious about conserving something.
Just a minute. Trademark, sorry, Spencer. Trademark for that phrase goes to Dave Raboy.
Dave Raboy? Oh, yes. I didn't realize. I know that you both said it. I thought it was yours. Okay, well, sorry, Dave.
From him many years ago. Sorry, just
no. We should know. People should follow and if they don't already, read Dave Raboy, who invented apparently the knowing what.
Does the phrase not at least go back to Flavor Flav?
I need that to be the pull quote from this podcast, Seth. In what context does Flavor Flav talk about knowing what time it is?
Well, that he wore that giant clock because he's the one who tells you what time it is. I mean, I do believe the phrase has like deeper roots, but that's neither here nor there.
Well, not to completely derail things, but I must say that, like, apropos of this, right? I mean, the idea that Damon Linker has any moral authority to talk about betrayal is just a ludicrous absurdity in its own right. But the reality is that, like, the people who support the Claremont Institute in many different walks of life, they are very normal human beings. I can attest personally, we can all confirm. They are normal Americans. They like their country. They like their lives. They like what they do by and large. They like who they surround themselves with. They're normal people. And so are we. And the ideas and the principles and the policies that we advance on a daily basis when others sit back and review Marvel movies and snipe from the sidelines are normal political ideals firmly within the mainstream of American politics. Left, right, and center. We say things that the likes of Gary Hart have said. We say things that the likes of Ron Paul have said. We say things that the likes of Barry Goldwater, Ronald Reagan, Teddy Roosevelt. It's a long list. It goes all the way back. Abraham Lincoln, George, lots and lots and lots of people across the political spectrum over the centuries have espoused the kinds of things that you will hear from the Claremont Institute. Of course, we have refined them in our own special way, as does any group of committed people who are serious about what they think and say and do. And guess who's been betrayed? The normal Americans who, for most of this country's history, have had a pretty solid consensus on some pretty basic things. Yes, there have been times of conflict. Yes, there have been times of realignment. But the threads that shine through are obvious to anyone who does even the slightest bit of investigation into American intellectual history. And it really wasn't until, approximately the moment that Barack Obama splashed the rainbow flag on the White House that suddenly things started to change. And what was normal in 1985 and normal in 1995 and normal in 2005 suddenly became, according to self-appointed experts, insane, beyond the pale, racist, extremist. It's garbage. It's a betrayal of normal Americans, and it needs to be called out as such. We have more in common than is being represented to us by the fanatics who are trying to demonize our country.
Yeah, let me add too, in terms of the American mind, this one asinine thing that keeps coming up is also, oh my gosh, you have different people who say different things, and some of those things are provocative. And again, it's not provocative. We're telling you what people are saying. We're telling you what people are thinking, and we're actually bringing that into the public eye. And that's a service to prevent us from going into further conflict and divide. And that's very offensive because the rest of the media won't show you those things and won't show you those views. But we publish a lot of different people who say a lot of different things. And this kind of divide that James is talking about, where normal people have been betrayed for a long time now, and we're not supposed to talk about it because the overlords don't allow it, which is what the Bulwark is mad about. I mean, we're obviously done with that. We don't care. We've already moved into different territory, and I think people out there should realize. I mean, we're really serious when we say we don't care about this piece. I mean, it doesn't emotionally change anything. I was thinking about this in terms of that Jason Stanley Yale professor that Rufo and others and myself were dunking on this week. I mean, to me, that was performative in a way. It felt like it needed to be done. I was on a plane, thought, okay, I should join in on this, which needed to be done. The guy's an idiot, talking about how natural law is a white Christian nationalism. But what struck me about the whole episode, which Davidson just wrote up for the Federalist, is that I don't feel anything about. I mean, those people are so out of touch. And if you still are impressed by the fact that someone's a Yale professor or someone's an expert here, or you're still afraid, you got to move on and get over it and move into the space that we're in now.
Just parenthetically, again, the insanity of someone saying that natural law is white Christian nationalism, when in fact, as we all know, it's really Middle Eastern pagan imperialism. Come on, people, right. This is basic stuff.
That's right.
Obviously, he didn't study his Byzantine history, or he didn't read Black Athena at Cale University.
Well, they seem to have this idea that. I mean, they seriously believe, and I've talked to a few of people on the left who really believe that Tucker Carlson is leading a vanguard action to impose a white ethno-state, and that this is the goal of the right wing. And so everything just kind of is, reverse engineered from that. Like, that's the premise. So sure, natural law. Well, that sounds weird. That must be a white Christian ethno-state thing to think about. Cornel West wasn't given tenure at Harvard. They must be part of the white Christian ethno-state. So it just works all the way down. But I agree with what everybody said. I mean, this idea. I mean, the Bulwark doesn't want normal people to express their opinions. They're not interested in the opinions of normal people. That's what they're doing what they're doing. I mean, that's why CNN and the whole media complex finds it intolerable that people are allowed to say things on Facebook or text to each other about whether or not they should get the vaccine without a little warning flag popping up. This is the cult of the liberal expert taken to, just its logical end, I guess, which is, anti-democratic, rule by bureaucrats.
It is telling to see the people crying the hardest about their norms exhibit such contempt for normal Americans.
Well, I mean, I think, Seth, what you say about this being essentially the progressive project, right? Capital P. This is all quite explicit in the writings of, say, Charles Beard or even indeed Woodrow Wilson, that, government is really a living organism and it evolves over time. And it was all well and good to talk about natural rights when it was the 18th century and we didn't know any better. And we also were self-interested slaveholders. But really, these sorts of things, they're all just determined by our material interests, or indeed by our position on the grand course of history, a la Hegel. And what it really takes is an enlightened statesman who can stand outside of all of this and proceed to discern the trajectory of history and just dictate it from the top down to everybody. I mean, so this is in fact an express turn. It's what people believe. I mean, when Joe Biden comes out and says that you need nukes to take on the U.S. government. Seth, you and I were talking about this on the Substack. Like, that's just an expression, a kind of outright expression of what progressives have been saying ever since they came on the scene, which is like, oh, the Second Amendment, like, that's old, it doesn't really matter anymore. And when, James, you describe that as a betrayal, it's absolutely a sort of concerted, a really devoted effort to replace the U.S. Constitution with enlightened bureaucratic statesmen. You can see it also in this latest little, I shouldn't call it little, this headline from the New York Post that Anthony Blinken, the Secretary of State, is welcoming a welcoming a UN probe of racism in the United States. That is, experts from the UN are going to come into the country and tell us how racist we all are, which just strikes me as a remarkable kind of feat of self-hatred and condemnation of the American people.
Yeah, it's bad. The Blinken statement, as the president has repeatedly made clear, he says, great nations such as ours. I mean, that right there is what I thought that was like offensive verbiage at this point. Do not hide from our shortcomings, semicolon. He used the semicolon. They acknowledge them openly and strive to improve with transparency. It is in this context that the United States intends to issue a formal standing invitation, an open door to all UN experts who report and advise on thematic human rights issues. I'm not sure what that means. As a first step, we have reached out to offer an official visit by the UN Special Rapporteur on Contemporary Forms of Racism and the UN Special Rapporteur on Minority Issues. So many buzzwords, so little time. And of course, you can imagine the reaction if a slightly different administration announced that they had issued a standing invitation to foreign experts from strong and powerful countries outside the United States to come and investigate and write up some reports on issues of woke authoritarianism in contemporary American life. I mean, you can hear the screeches, the shrieking, the gnashing of teeth, the rending of garments. This is just indicative of such tremendous weakness and impotence and futility to even imagine that this is something that any U.S. government would actually not just say out loud or signal, but actively pursue. We need foreign masters to come in and tell us how bad we are. This is, is this even, how can such a thing be compatible with our form of government?
Well, I mean, I'm just thinking it's like classic liberal self-flagellation. It reminds me of like, I don't know, Carter era type of, acceptance of the idea that the United Nations truly is a like one nation, one vote type of world government that we're, really trying to move toward. And this idea that the US, there's nothing exceptional about the US, and, the US and Belize are basically equals. Let's let the Belize delegation come in and inspect our elections and our healthcare system. And advise us. What does the Mauritanian delegate think? But at the same time, they're doing it around this one topic, which, like, the harsher the criticism that the U.S. gets on this question of racism, the more it redounds to the power of the regime. Like, yes, you see, it has been established. The Bengali delegate and the delegate from Chad both agree that the U.S. has very deep systemic problems that we need to address. Well, fortunately, we've got a plan for that. So, I mean, it's so deeply cynical and just horrifying to think that they want to turn the country over to this kind of, ostensibly to this kind of, what they're calling a transparency. I mean, to me, what it reminds me of? It reminds me of the way that the administration set up some kind of bogus, lockbox so Hunter Biden can not sell his terrible art anonymously. Like, why is the Biden administration involving itself in setting up an ethics commission to manage the money laundering sale of a presidential junior's art, pretending that it's all masked, when obviously it's actually the opposite? It seems like actually this is like a way in which they can, like, very carefully account for who's bribing the president's son. It's just a similar kind of pretense towards transparency, when in fact it's just the opposite.
Do you think any of it shows a sign of weakness amidst a show of strength? In other words, especially the speech where he's talking about how it's Republicans trying to vote for election integrity. That's the worst crisis since the Civil War. No hyperbole, he said. Right? This is the worst since the Civil War. That sort of rhetoric, combined with all these actions, bring the UN in, talk about racism, train the national security states, Eye of Sauron on the rest of the country. I mean, there is a sense there that, right, we really need to do all the things now. I mean, I do wonder if there's some worry there about, 2022 and 2024, and it's like the push is we need to lock it all down now. We need a full-scale assault, and that doesn't necessarily mean that they're weak or going to lose, but it is interesting to me that it's all out, and I don't know whether that's because they're just going to keep pushing as hard as they can. Just that's the flow of things until they hit a stopping point or things break down, or it's because there really is some real worry after this election that they need to lock it down. And I'm curious what you guys think about that.
Well, I mean, it's been said before, but they really, even though they did manage to, shall we say, grasp the presidency, to use a sort of agnostic and neutral verb, right? In an election that was thoroughly irregular, that was at the very, very least totally reshaped both by pandemic authoritarianism and by judicial fiat, in many cases unconstitutionally. They eked out the presidency, but they really, like, if that's the best that you can do with total control over the institutions that are ostensibly ascendant in the country, of every major established organ of power, from the academy to the media to the to public health officials, right? I mean, really everywhere. And you're rioting in the streets, and you're threatening to do it again, right? And if that's all you can do, then yeah, you really didn't win, right? I mean, we just published the DSA's, the Democratic Socialists of America's sort of draft platform, and they're eons away from what they want, which is complete sort of totalitarian socialism enforced in every aspect of American life, blended with this kind of woke social dogma. So on that level, yeah, I mean, it does sort of seem as if they have a very, very tenuous grasp of a country which is still, as James indicates, full of decent people who actually quite like each other, who like their country, who have a lot of common sense, and who are not reacting to this as expected, right? In the way that that kind of progressive capital P dogma would indicate, that like they would welcome their great liberators, right? Like people ain't doing that. People aren't lining up to like all get vaccinated like zombies. They're not really accepting this thing about the Delta variant. They're pushing back in all sorts of ways. They're getting critical race theory out of their schools. Regular parents who are not like, you know, sleeper agents for Fox News or the American Mind, but like actual just people who find out what's going on in their classrooms and are utterly appalled. Like people don't like have any truck with this, and the minute they are told the truth by the you know, institutions that still exist like Claremont that kind of like spread the word about this stuff, and just by ordinary people talking to each other on Twitter and in the DMs, which is why they hate that and are trying to shut it down, right? The minute people hear the truth about what's going on, they find it appalling. And it's not about like, you know, pre-commitment to Straussianism or like, you know, voting the straight Republican ticket. It's just about folks kind of being Americans and wanting to live their lives according to their traditional and good and upright folk ways, as they have done in this country since it was founded, and indeed before. So like, yeah, like they don't have a grip on those people, and they do fear what will happen if those people are allowed in a free and fair election to evaluate their performance.
Well,
yeah, I mean, the weakness just rises off of the administration like stink fumes off of a pile of garbage left out over the weekend in the hot, hot sun. I mean, you could just run down the list, right? Like Antony Blinken, Secretary of State, goes to Alaska for, you know, we'll have a little talk with the Chinese, gets every part of his body handed to him by the Chinese delegation. Kamala Harris is like despised and held in contempt by Biden's own people, as far as what we can glean from the news trickling out of the White House, which of course reporters are desperate not to let out of the barn. I mean, Joe Biden himself is just like wheeled around like Mason Verger, like croaking from behind his sunglasses, you know, just from event to event, speaking gibberish half the time and eating ice cream the other half. It's a sad display, and these are supposedly the people at the top of the food chain. It raises the question of whether anyone's at the top of the food chain, and if so, you know, who are those people? Where are they? It would appear that they don't hold elective office. They're burrowed deep inside of the administrative state, and you know, come hell or high water, no one's going to, you know, be able to dig them out with a fork. I mean, it's really appalling. And one reason why you want to see some kind of spine or muscle among elected officials is because if there's none there, then people are going to start realizing that, well, you know, in order to really get some kind of corrective to this drift or, you know, plunge over the falls, we need to reach up even higher to, you know, the people who really do call the shots in the administrative state, people who are appointed and not elected, people who can't be thrown out by elections, people who, you know, you can't reach them, but they can reach you. You know, they have 6 ways till Sunday to get to you. They can audit you. They can, you know, knock on your door. They can surveil you. They can reach right down into the most intimate details of your life and have their way with you. And that's a realization that I think is starting to set in. You know, this too is bipartisanship of a way. You know, there are folks across the right and the center, and you know, and increasingly on the left. Plenty of them on Substack now. You know, covering this beat every day. Who are saying, you know, it's what's going on at the elected level is bad enough as it is, but if you just keep your eye on that the whole time, you're not going to get the full picture, and the full picture is even worse.
What about this is all a little bit of a white pill, I guess. Push back a little bit. I mean, I'm not sure about where the people are at and whether they can be woken up, and you know, whether we can get someone like a Ron DeSantis in there to actually attack the deep state you're talking about. No one knows. But increasingly, I've heard people say this to me, and I've been thinking about it myself. I wonder, thinking to 2024, what should be done in between. It's really unclear how we can do this again, right? I mean, it's unclear how, when both sides have a deep set narrative that it's all corrupt. Biden is already saying this is like the Civil War, changing these laws. And both sides, right, already are saying the game is rigged. If it's not a close election, I don't understand how we're going to get through it, or what will happen. So I guess, I mean, my hope would be that there'd be some kind of resurgence in 2022, which I think will happen, and then we'll get there. But when you think about politically addressing these issues, what Biden has said this week, saying, this is like unto the Civil War, most serious thing, no hyperbole. If that rhetoric keeps up and we're so early from the midterms in 2024, I don't know, how the hell we're going to have a presidential election and get through it, unless it is a landslide, and that's hard to conceive of.
Well, I mean, I don't know about you guys. I sort of am not looking any further into the future than 2022, and I don't mean that in the sense of like, I'm interested in who is emerging as a potential frontrunner for the nomination, and I'm interested in anybody who thinks that he can strategize toward, for example, reversing some of those COVID era court cases that I mentioned. But I do think that like delivering a strong and stern rebuke to this monoparty with actual conservative challengers who have really genuinely won, seats in actual Congress will kind of change the mood a little bit. And we've been talking already on this show about the fact that like so much of this rhetoric is so overblown. It's already like my feeling, Matt, about what you said vis-a-vis, changing these laws is structural racism, is Jim Crow, is the Civil War, like, is that if they're already at 150, then like where is there for them to go? And I do think, I mean, we should mention in this context, as we're talking about it, that thread by this fellow Martyr Made, who published then with us about his experience of talking to folks who believe very passionately that the election was stolen. And he outlines in some considerable detail the extent to which that worldview, no matter how many conspiracy theories may in an individual level be involved in that worldview, it ultimately reflects a very serious realization among average folks that this unelected capital R regime ruling class does exist and does genuinely, as he says, believe that deplorables are beneath representation. And that's something that we haven't seen American politics yet in a world where like a large percentage of just regular workaday conservatives understand that that's the case. So I think that like that will change the game quite a bit going forward, because it will, I hope, break the power, this sort of magic spell of these labels that they throw at people: racist, white supremacist, Jim Crow, whatever, right? Like all of these painful moments from our history that they invoke to shut us up. I hope at least that realization post 2020 politics, and hopefully post a win in 2022, will mobilize people.
So maybe the white pill side of that is, look, they are pushing because they realize they're losing the people. People don't believe the lies,
right?
And also the charge of racism, it's just losing its salience when you call everyone and everything racist. It's like with the Bulwark piece. I mean, why even bother to respond to this stuff? I mean, it's just every day. And once you've said whiteness itself is bad, at that point, then you just kind of took away your weapon, because now all of a sudden everyone knows, well, there's nothing I can do, right? To show I'm not a racist, and most people aren't going to want to, do whatever weird rituals they were doing in Bethesda, Maryland, and chant the incantations and go into the woke religion. So yeah, that's positive. I'd say the other great thing is we met a lot of great people at the Hot Gulag Summer Party this week, some of us, and that was heartening as well. Over 300 people in Dallas hanging out, gulagswag.com.
Mm.
And that was that was a great event, and you could feel the energy, just like you could feel the energy this week online of people who are just done with the old stuff and really want to move forward.
Yeah, we should emphasize, sorry, that gulagswag.com is a place where you can currently get your Hot Gulag Summer merch. People should go and check it out.
Yeah, and just regarding the election stuff, whether or not we could possibly, I mean, look, all of what they're calling a radical attempt to erase voting rights and, go back to the days of, how many bubbles are in this bar of soap. If you want to vote, you got to tell me that, or, recite the Constitution backwards. I mean, all they're trying to do is restore the norms of balloting that existed before COVID, right? Like, okay, you can't sign a candy bar and wrapper and just drop it on the ground, and that should count as your vote. Or, I mean, if you look at what they did, they completely loosened the standards for how they count absentee ballots. They didn't challenge anything. So, I mean, look, maybe this is white pill, but if you go back to the way it's supposed to be, well, then, we should win comfortably. As long as they're really counting the ballots. Maybe that's overly optimistic.
Well, this sheds light on the importance of who controls Congress, or especially the House in the next election. And I guarantee you that if it tips in favor of the Republicans, and there are those who say that it is all too easy to see how the Republicans would win, and that might create some problems in its own right. But if it does indeed tip, the caucus of fake conservatives is going to be very loud, and they are going to insist that now is the time to make sure that any last vestige of Trumpiness is stamped out of the party. And, now is the time to make sure that, if the wrong candidate is nominated, that, we don't support this person, and that they fail in 2024 so that we can reclaim the Republican Party. It's going to have a lot riding on it. And what Congress needs to do, if it is capable of doing so, is it needs to correct and standardize some of this voting stuff, so that we are not sliding toward what the other side clearly wants, which is a plebiscitary democracy conducted on the basis of social credit, where if your friends or your family rat you out to the feds for saying something that they didn't like, or because they'd rather have your job than you have it, then you're maybe on a blacklist. You're maybe losing rights. You're maybe being put up on bogus charges and sent to jail for a while. This is the direction that things are going in. Not just the kind of vote on the Snickers wrapper, which we're already seeing, but unprotected drop boxes, ballot harvesting. I'm sure vote by internet is going to be floated if it hasn't already been floated in some areas. Really just making it, everything short of jacking into the brains of every person in America, and, counting which electrodes flash, and that's their vote. You can take a plebiscitary vote whenever you want. And the way to prevent us from slipping into that direction is for Congress to assert itself, because right now the only people who are capable of doing so are at the state and local level, and that stuff's important. But I don't think I'm alone in surmising that this stuff is going to come to a head nationally, and Congress is the legislative body, and they better get on it.
So what about the Texas Democratic legislators who have bravely fled the state?
Mm-hmm.
What does everybody think about that?
I'm just hoping they don't let them back. I mean,
well, Abbott says that they'll be arrested.
We want to make sure that more of them leave as soon as possible, preferably to a state that they like better. No, I think it's interesting. My quick take is seems to me to be a failure, just ops wise. The optics here are not good for them, and I think it was a sort of a necessary thing for them to pull out all the stops. That's where they're at. They're doing everything they can in every state. They see their life revolving around the election laws, and I think there is desperation there. But I think this is a big backfire for them nationally and also within the state, from what I can gather.
Well, it was another one where they were so absurd, right? I mean, they were tweeting out these ridiculous portrayals of themselves as refugees from a war-torn whatever, that was, and people were roundly mocking them. I mean, yeah, I hate to be too white-pilled. It does sort of seem as if, I mean, I think that the battle is the one that James outlines, and that is really it's a battle for effective control of the Republican Party, so that it doesn't, as our friends at American Moments like to say, it doesn't go back, and it isn't captured by the people that run the Bulwark, which I think is that's a very winnable fight. And then it's getting elected officials to actually legislate and do their jobs, which is something we have to hold their feet to the fire on. And it sort of seems to me as if the Texas thing is a good indicator that grandstanding and showboating is kind of out and getting serious is kind of in. Well, on that white pill, I guess I'll just shut it down before we say anything too depressing to counteract our vaguely hopeful conclusions. So I will thank you guys for joining me, and thank you for listening to the Roundtable. If you want to support our work, visit claremont.org/donate. And if you want to learn more about all our projects and writings, visit our websites at americanmind.org, claremont.org, claremontreviewofbooks.com, and our brand new Washington, D.C. based Center for the American Way of Life at dc.claremont.org. Don't forget also to sign up for our Substack, where we give extra spicy takes regularly. And indeed, there is a daily short podcast there with all of us. Please rate, share, and subscribe at Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks to the production and engineering crew, Jake Gannon and Annalisa Lee. And thank you all for listening. In many ways, I think a lot of the stuff we were talking about was an expression of gratitude for all of you out there who are with us in this. We will talk to you next week.